who looked at the archetypes. And the idea was that, I had noticed that there were certain recurring types of characters. For instance, I saw, yes, there's heroes, and I love the heroes. I loved John Wayne and Roy Rogers and Errol Flynn and all these other people who represented the heroic ideal to me. And then I noticed there were villains, and that they had some things in common. You might see the same actor playing the villain in several different movies, like Basil Rathbone often played that role in the Errol Flynn movies. But the archetypes idea is that you need to focus really on the job that the character is doing in the script at a given moment. And this is to get you away from sort of cliches about characters, that my villain, if I'm going to write a villain, I want the villain to be like everybody's idea of the villain, that he'll be dressed all in black, and he'll, have a mustache that he twirls, or that he'll be bristling with knives, or, he goes around poisoning people, something really on the nose like that. This is in the effort to get away from that, and to think of character as individual people, yes, but also jobs that they do from time to time in the course of the story. And I identified about 8 of those functions that I thought were essential. But before we get into those 8 archetypes, which I'm going to share with you today, I want to also share a little something I've been working on. I've been looking for the last 6 months at one word, and that word is character. I've tried to get everything I could out of the idea of character, and go back to the sources. So I'm actually having a little trouble because my screen has frozen. I've got a message saying it's being recorded by the host, and I can't get that off the screen. So let me, and I can't move any of the other buttons because I can't get that thing off. So I beg your pardon just for a moment while I try to undo this.
I'm searching for some help. We'll find Mike.
Okay. Yeah, it says this meeting is being recorded by the host or a participant. That popped up. And while I'm in PowerPoint, I can't move the cursor around.
Oh, so Chris, this is Linda. If you try to
Mike, are you there?
hit OK, where it talks to you about being
Are
recorded,
you aware of what's happening on the screen?
where you see the banner that tells you you're being
Yeah, I can
recorded?
see that, but I can't get the cursor over it. See, that's the
Oh,
problem.
you can't move the cursor.
Yeah, the cursor only operates over on the window that shows all the people, and it doesn't.
Do you have the answer for this, Mike?
I think if they make you co-host for a moment, you should be able to do it.
That might do it.
Yeah, try making, Dwight, if you can, make Chris a co-host. It will probably help.
Mike?
Chris, you are the co-host.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, let's see. All right. So now all of
now
a
we're
sudden the
moving.
slides
Yeah.
started moving in delay. Let's see. I'll be okay. I can still see this dumb screen in front of me, but you can see what I want you to see. So.
Computer had to catch up.
Oh, okay.
So this is what I like to do is I like to go back.
You're staying engaged, right? So you can see it.
So we're okay now?
Yes.
Okay. So what I like to do is go back to the origins of everything, back to the word, back to the earliest version of the story, back to the original first draft if I'm working with someone on their script. what was the novel that it was based on. I try to go back to the roots as far as I possibly can. So when I started looking at the idea of character, I found that it's actually a Greek word, and it comes to us directly from Greek, like a lot of terms that we use in the theater and in drama and in narrative writing. Words like scene and crisis and climax and the word theater itself, the word actor, all those are actually directly out of Greek. So character is one of those. And it originally meant an engraving tool or something that you use to carve things, or it would be the marks that were made by those things onto stone, leather, or wood. And, you know, this left an impression, it left a mark. And eventually the Greeks started thinking about this as a metaphor for character, for how people's personalities were formed by the blows of life. And that your life story is sort of being written on you by the impressions you pick up from other people, by the accidents of your birth, by the environment you grew up in. Even things like the weather around you affects your personality and the growth of your character. The Greeks used different words besides character. They talked about the public character with the word phami, which means, which is the same as the English word fame. That's where we get the English word fame. So your public reputation is one side, and then your private personality or character is a word they use called ethos, from which we get ethical. And it means your own private kind of steering instructions, your limits, your idea of yourself, your sort of inner decision-making about what you will do and what you won't do. And that forms the inner side of the character. But they use this word character to describe somebody's personality as it developed and as people saw them in the outside world and as they changed and reacted on the inside. And I came up with a kind of an equation that character, the way we think of it, I'm not speaking here about characters in stories, I'm speaking about human character, about your personality and your sort of moral universe. That could be described as an equation which might go something like character equals the marks that are made on you by life, the blows of life, plus how you react to the blows of life and what imprints do you leave on the world. So character is the combination of the blows that shape you and then how you turn around and react to those and shape the world around you, your own world, and also how you affect the world you live in. So it's a two-dimensional, at least, process to develop your character. And I think this is something that we all need to think about as writers, because we're creating characters, these imaginary people, or if they're real people, we make an imaginary version of them, but they should have character in this other sense. They should possess character. And that character can be virtuous, or it can be flawed or weak or imperfect in some way. And that's really where the drama and the interest is. It's nice to see stories about virtuous people being virtuous, but it's the wicked ones and the fallen ones who are interesting. And we watch to see, will they be redeemed or will they be doomed? Those are the two basic possibilities of drama, that it will end in the sort of comic way, that there'll be a happy ending, or that the person will not learn their lesson and will be doomed or end up unhappy. So this is some work I'm doing right now, and I'm working on an essay that might grow into a book that I'm thinking of calling the 7 pillars of character, because I looked at 7 different Greek ideas, and each of those ideas was actually turned into a character by the Greeks, because they couldn't really deal with abstract things unless they turned them into human-like characters, the gods and the goddesses who represented different human possibilities. So you would find characters and gods and goddesses to represent something like the idea of excellence. The Greeks were crazy about excellence. They almost worshiped it. They wanted to be excellent in everything they did, in athletics, in philosophy, in art. Every citizen tried to be, a fully developed person, and a sound mind and a sound body, and be a fully realized human being with a fully developed virtuous character. And so they would work on this, and this quality of excellence was called arete, and there was a goddess called arete. And so they could have temples to her and worship her, or ask for the help of excellence if they were trying to do something that required that quality. And there's even a story about this goddess Arete. She had an ugly, evil twin who was called Kakia. And Hercules was walking down the road one day, and he came to a crossroads, and on one side was this difficult path that went up a twisted hill with lots of thorns and rocks and slippery slopes and very difficult path. And then there's another very easy path off to the other side. And these 2 women were standing there, Arete showing him the difficult way, and Kakia showing him the easy way. And he decided right on the spot, I'm going to take the hard road, because that's the road of glory. The Greeks were very interested in fame and glory and being remembered for what they had done, for their good deeds. And so that was supposed to be the noble pathway. And the other way is easy and attractive, and maybe it's glamorous, but the people who take that path are soon forgotten. They don't get that immortal glory. So I have 6 more character points like that, or different goddesses and gods who represented different things like luck and the contest itself. That's a whole area. Justice and revenge, these different possibilities. So that's just some work I'm doing right now. But I'd like to bring it back to this archetype idea. It's so important, I think, this human need to leave a mark. Like I said, character is the combination of the mark that's made on you by life and the mark you make on the world. And here you see in an ancient cave, maybe 30,000 years ago, all these people pressed their hands up and blew paint onto their hands to make these outlines, so that the next people who came along would remember them and know what they had done. So this is a very basic human need. And you can see here's an individual who's got both hands. And I think what they did is they actually took the paint into their mouth. They ground up pigments, mixed it with water, took it into their mouth, and then sprayed it out, maybe through a straw, or maybe they just spit it out onto their hand to make this outline. So it's part of this ancient need that people have to leave their mark. And all of us as writers are participating in that, because part of why you want to write things is so you'll be remembered, so that your impressions of the world, the things you've seen and experienced, will be passed on to somebody else. And that's a wonderful thing. This is kind of a sad, poignant version of this, the mark that people leave. These are the footprints of a mother and child that were fossilized. They were obviously running away from something, maybe a volcanic eruption, and had to cross over this muddy spot. And almost immediately after that, this whole area was completely buried in a volcanic eruption or something like that, or a mudslide. And it ended up preserving the footprint. So there's the mark of somebody from 30 or 40,000 years ago. You know, you feel that. You feel the connection to somebody who left their mark on the earth. So back to the archetypes. Yeah, this is a death mask here of one of the characters in the Odyssey. It's supposed to be the death mask of one of the Greek generals, one of the kings, Agamemnon. It may be a true death mask or a portrait, or it may just be kind of a stylized representation of what a king was supposed to look like. But anyway, they found it on the face of a dead king in the tomb. And it represents this idea I'm getting at, that characters wear masks to do different jobs. And we're going to talk about what those jobs are. So the archetypes are like masks that the characters assume to do these different roles or different tasks at different times in the story. Any character can wear any one of the masks. Anybody in the script can, at a different time, have to do these different jobs. And the hero probably is going to try on a lot of different masks. That's something to keep in mind when you're creating your story and writing your hero, is give the hero opportunities to get out of his or her own shell and to put on the shoes of somebody else, or put on the costume or the wig of somebody else, and walk in their shoes for a while and see what that feels like. Or that they have to sometimes develop another side to their personality to get something done. For instance, my wife is much more organized than I am, and she does all the planning for the trips and so forth. But once in a while, when we're traveling, she'll just get tired. And suddenly I'll realize I've got to get us to the airport, and I've got to figure out what time the flight leaves, and I've got to arrange all this stuff. And the only way I know how to do it is put on the mask of my wife. And I just pretend that I'm channeling my wife, and I find I can do things that Chris Vogler can't really do, because I've taken on my wife's personality, and I'm wearing her mask for a little bit. So the first one, the obvious one to start with, is the hero. And here, this is what we were talking about as we got started, the idea that there should be role models. There should be figures in our stories who are maybe a little larger than life, or they take some aspect of life like freedom and bring that to its fullest expression. This was a very important film and actor for me. Errol Flynn in The Adventures of Robin Hood really sort of rung a bell for me, and I vibrated. I mean, almost literally, my body vibrated in response to stories like this. It made me, very active as a kid and wanting to run around and play sword fight and swing from the trees. I did all of that, but it also had some deeper elements to it, and actually was part of propaganda at the time. This movie came out in the late 1930s as we were getting ready for a war in Europe, and the situation was very similar to what we face today, where America was trying to stay neutral in a European conflict, and they made Robin Hood and other movies at that time to encourage sympathy for the English, in this case, who were being beaten up on by a European power. So movies sometimes have this propaganda possibility as well, or just, emphasizing positive things. This is the illustration from my book of the idea of the hero. It's sort of an androgynous figure. You don't know if it's male or female, but represents the person on the journey and traveling alone usually, and going through a dark, mysterious wood. We have to do constant adjusting to our ideas about these characters and archetypes. We have had to do a lot of catch-up work recently to adjust the way we showed women. You know, when I started in the film business, you could really say things like, okay, we know who the hero is. Well, who's the girl? You know, and that's all you had to say was there's a girl. And so you knew that she was the love interest, and you knew that she would be in danger, and you knew that the hero would rescue her. And you just knew all these cliches. And now we have to think differently. And you have to get past a phase of simply taking the male cliches and giving them to the females. So you saw a lot of posters in the early days of this awakening where it was exactly the same poster, except it was a woman holding a gun or a weapon instead of the man. And now we're getting much more sophisticated about these things and evolving, but you have to get past these immediate first cliches. There's nothing new about this sort of thing. It's been going on in the Greek world forever. This is the goddess Diana, the huntress, who occupies a similar position in the story of the gods, as does Katniss Everdeen in those movies. So another thing about the heroes is that they don't have to be just one person. You can have dual heroes, a two-hander, they call that in Hollywood, or you can have collective heroes, and certainly Lord of the Rings gives us a great example of that. The whole first movie is dedicated to building this team, the Fellowship of the Ring, and they develop relationships, and there are several pairs among them, pairs of the hobbits and pairs of noble knights, and various kind of oppositions and contrasts among the group. But it makes for a rich experience for the audience, and lots of different ways you can express aspects of heroism. The tall, skinny versions and the short and funny versions, all those are offered to you. We've been talking as we got started about the sort of roller coaster nature of ideas about these things, that they sort of go forward or go upward in society's estimation at times, and then they fall down at other times, and we become cynical and worn out. I saw that happen in my early years when a great hero to me, John Wayne, who had made fantastic movies that just were a treat for me, like The Alamo. Corny though it was, I loved it. Then all of a sudden Vietnam comes, and he makes a movie called The Green Berets, and he becomes a laughingstock. And the whole universe of movies turns against him and what he represented, and we got into the era of easy riders. So then you had the superheroes come along, and they were so super and so over the top that they became ridiculous and cartoonish, and that's where you end up here, where they're good for cartoons and for dressing up on Halloween. These are Halloween costumes. You can get this dog costume or Wonder Woman or whatever you fancy, and we don't take these things all that seriously. But then something happens, like 9/11 situation, and suddenly heroes get back up in the estimation of society and become more heroic and shinier and more highly valued. And then we adjust again, and sometimes put focus where it should be, I think, on ordinary heroes, the people who do the daily jobs, the garbage collectors, the teachers, the guy who walks along through the sheep dung so you can have a lamb chop. And, somebody's got to do these dirty jobs, and there should be respect for that. So the idea hero has expanded to take that in. And then we're really, really focusing now in long form TV on going very deep on dark characters who all kind of have the same profile as a character. They're deeply flawed, they're selfish, they're impulsive, they are kind of thugs or criminals in some way or other, liars, but they also deeply, deeply want to be good and have that side of them as well. It may not be the first thing you see about them. It may take time in this show for you to understand that about them, but they're torn between this very, very strong impulse for violence or for selfish behavior or irresponsible behavior, and then torn on the other side by the desire to be loved or to be good. So we're doing deep examination of such things. The hero is typically the one that the audience identifies with the most. They invest themselves in the hero. So the hero has to be sort of inviting to the audience. They need to have some characteristics that we would like to have. Maybe they're charming, or maybe they're in a jam. That might be that they're orphaned or alone somehow, or that they've lost something important to them. All those things help make identification and sympathy for the hero. Having the hero, as was famously pointed out in the book Save the Cat, having the hero do something nice early in the story, maybe something self-sacrificing to save an animal or help somebody out, that requires going out of your way or taking some risk. Those things help win sympathy for this hero character. The hero is usually the most active character in the story, or should be. Sometimes the villain is the one doing most of the rushing around, instigating things, but it's better, I think, if the hero is the one who's the most active. And also, the hero is the one who has the most to learn, or they have the longest way to go on the journey. If you're confused about who the hero is, and that happens sometimes as you're composing your story or trying to find your story, sometimes you aren't really clear on who's the real hero of this piece. And that's one way you tell, is who has the most to learn and who has the furthest to go. The hero it's another Greek word, and it means someone who protects and serves. The root her, H-E-R, is in the goddess Hera. She's a protector and a servant. And so the hero should be someone who fulfills that function in society. And it happens that many police departments have as their motto to protect and to serve. The Los Angeles Police Department has that stamped on the door of every police car, to protect and to serve, meaning that we're not here to push you around. We might have to if you're out of line, but we're really here to protect the people and to do service. And I think the best police are right in line with that. This idea of the hero has a lot to do with taking responsibility, with moving towards more involvement and taking on more of a active function in society or within the community or within a family. And that might be the journey for the hero, is to learn how to do that, how to take more responsibility. Heroes are often very, very flawed. They're imperfect. They're missing something. We wouldn't respect them or pay attention to them if they were absolutely perfect, because why are we watching? We're not in suspense. We know a perfect person is not going to make any mistakes. So it's good. Even Superman has some imperfections and flaws. and is susceptible to things like kryptonite. And if Lois Lane looks at him funny, he gets nervous. So the next archetype, and these are things that I identified by looking at many, many movies and many myths and stories and trying to see what were these working parts, is the next one that comes up is the mentor. And this is an idea I adapted from Joseph Campbell. He talked about the wise old man or the wise old woman. And I did some editing there because sometimes I found there were characters like this who were doing this job, this archetypal function, but they weren't wise and they weren't old and they weren't even a man or a woman. So, you know, sometimes an animal can serve this function. There are wonderful stories about people who are in trouble and it's their dog that shows them the way. You know, the dog is a better human than they are. That's a wonderful sort of subgenre. And so I needed a looser word or a more general word to describe this kind of figure. So I came to mentor. And mentor actually is a character in the Odyssey. And that's where we get the name. In the Odyssey, the hero Odysseus goes to fight the Trojan War and takes his own sweet time getting back. So he's gone for 20 years. And while he was gone, his son grew up in a household mainly run by women, but also overrun by playboys in the neighborhood who want to marry his mother. They want her to declare the husband dead and you know, share the kingdom with her. So these louts, these ungracious men are hanging around the house and bullying this young man. And there's a servant in the house, mentor. He's sort of the butler, and he's pretty meek and mild. But one day he suddenly starts talking in a big voice, and he says, "Young man, you must get out into the world and find your father. If your father was here, that's what he would do. So here's a chariot and some men and some weapons, and go out and seek adventure and find your father." Something happened to this meek, mild character. He was possessed by a goddess, by the goddess Athena, the goddess of wisdom, who had a fondness for Odysseus and his whole family. She wanted them to be happy and get together. So she took over Mentor's body for a while and made him this clear-speaking, authoritative voice that sent the man out on his journey and gave him things that would help him. And that's one of the key things about the mentor archetype, is that they give gifts to the heroes. It might be advice, it might be a map, it might be a magic weapon. It could be a very, very simple thing, but this is their keynote, this is their job. And this is how you tell if they're doing their job. If they don't give the hero something, then they're not fulfilling their function in the story. So they have to give advice or knowledge or a secret trick that can come in handy later. They give the hero whatever the hero needs to proceed on the adventure. So there's an image. Now, these black and white images I had commissioned by an artist for the third edition of my book before the 25th anniversary edition. They're in both those editions. And I just think they're wonderful objects for meditation and contemplation. I would like to make a deck of cards based on these that would be storytelling cards. So that's another project I'm working on. But here's the mentor guiding the hero into the dark forest. But the thing about the mentors is they can only go so far with the hero. At a certain point, they back off and the hero has to go it alone. The mentor might show up again in a bad spot where the hero needs a little boost, but most of the time, after their initial gift, the mentor turns the hero loose and the hero has to figure it out on their own. And there's an example from The Lord of the Rings, this wonderful character Gandalf, and he goes through some transformations. He goes through his own death and rebirth and has his own hero's journey, so they can also go through the same things the heroes go through. The next of these archetypes was the shadow. I knew there were villains, and I needed a name for that fit into this mythological framework. And the word shadow comes from Jung, from the depth psychology of Carl Jung. And he says that within every person, you have this cast of characters, including the hero and the mentor and the father and the mother and various other jobs or sub-personalities. But within every person, there is a shadow. And the shadow is the dark side of you. It's the failures. It's the doubts. It's everything you don't like about yourself. It's all those horrible things that you remember that you said that you wish you hadn't said. Everybody's got a big pile of those. But it also is external to the hero. The hero's got a shadow inside, but there's usually an embodiment of that outside, which is the villain. And I like using the shadow word in both those senses. It's something inside the hero that's threatening or shameful, but it's also an external expression of that through some kind of a enemy or opponent for the hero. And of course, there's Nosferatu, who's the vampire version of all this. And the shadow, does sort of cast a chilly shadow over things and kind of bums out the hero's happy day. Become what's called a nemesis. That's one of the things in this new work I'm doing on character. There was a goddess named Nemesis who haunted people if they'd done something wrong and just wouldn't leave you alone until things were set right. Pursue you, and that's another thing. And there is a very good example in Lord of the Rings. There's a wonderful scene in the second movie that wasn't in the book. They invented this for the script, where this character talks to his own shadow. And he is himself a kind of shadow. He's the dark possibilities of the hobbits. He started out as a hobbit, and then he was tempted by the ring and his greed, and he devolved, and he became more and more inhuman and more like a monster. But he's got a little glimmer of hope because Frodo, the nice hobbit, has said, you're really a good person and we're going to trust you. And he can hardly believe it. Somebody likes me and thinks I'm okay. But then he gets into an argument with his own shadow side. So there's two of these characters. Gollum is his name. And the two are talking to each other. And the evil side of Gollum wins the argument and ends up tempting him to try and kill the good hobbit Frodo. So it's a wonderful scene that shows how this works. Even the shadow has a shadow. So it's an interesting full expression of this idea. Next one up is the shapeshifter. And this is a little bit tricky, but this is where I was trying to park all of the thoughts about romance and also friendships and buddy relationships. When I was working at Disney in sort of my heyday, which was in the late 80s and early 90s, at the time they were doing The Lion King, over on the live action side, we were making a lot of buddy pictures, which were two-hander movies where you would pair up somebody like Richard Dreyfuss and Eddie Murphy or some combination like that. Of two people from different backgrounds, and you'd slap them together in a police situation, and one would be loosey-goosey and funny and irreverent, and the other one would be rigid and by the book. And out of the contrast of the characters, you would get some wonderful comedy and some exciting action scenes. But one of those characters would often be a shapeshifter, meaning they were a little bit shifty, and they maybe concealed their true nature. Maybe they were hiding something, and maybe they were good at disguises and could take on different appearances. So this is something I expanded into the area of romance, with the thought being, when you fall in love with someone, you are really falling in love with an impression or an illusion of the other person. You've made a first impression. Maybe you saw them at a party and thought that's the one for me. And it might be a long time before you realize who it really is. And they might go through a lot of shifting of their shape to try and please you or trick you, or maybe just your own illusions have clouded your vision so that they end up shifting shape, and you get a different idea about them. So this is something I noticed in a lot of movies, that the hero would be hooked up, whether the hero is male or female, the hero would eventually be hooked up with someone who was very shifting in their appearance, and maybe pretended to be a friendly agent, but in fact were working for the villains, or they were insecure, so they pretended to be somebody bigger and fancier than they were. But this idea kept recurring, that there are people who shift their shape. And it's a task for the hero and a challenge for the hero to try and see through to the real person and get past the illusions. And the image here is, from many, many myths about creatures that can turn back and forth from a wolf to a person, or a bat from a man, Batman, or the vampires can shift shape and become other things. And there's a strong element in the folklore of places like Ireland and Scotland about shapeshifters who are part seal or part fish or something like that. And they can remove their animal skin, and there's a human underneath there, and people fall in love with the human, not realizing that they've actually married a seal. And one day the seal gets lonely for the water and puts the seal coat back on again and swims away, leaves the husband sad and mourning for his lost love. So it has this romantic element of something that you can't quite ever get your hands on. And so it even got into the language of the Star Trek series. There is a race of aliens called shapeshifters, and they have that ability to take on the appearance or part of the appearance of anybody they are dealing with, and it makes them good diplomats for one thing. They can, or good spies, so they can get into your head and sort of mirror back your own feelings. And there was one in one of the movies I worked on at Disney, Aladdin. The genie was a pure shapeshifter of this type, and it took on dozens of different roles. This one, he was pretending to be Jack Nicholson, but he could be anything you needed. Next archetype is the trickster. And this is where I put all the clowns and the funny guys and all of the comedy elements. It has a long, long tradition in folklore and fairy tales that goes back to some stories from ancient Egypt, actually, that then were passed on through all the tribes of Africa, and eventually through the slave trade, ended up in the southern United States with the tales of Uncle Remus and the other rabbits and foxes and bears and so forth that you find in the African-American culture that came from Africa. And they tend to feature small, weak animals like turtles or rabbits. Maybe they're slow. Maybe they don't have a lot of power in the structure. And they're dealing with great big enemies, hunters, or bigger animals. But they end up prevailing because they use the power of numbers. The rabbits often will gang up and breed up a lot of rabbits and overrun the enemy by sheer numbers, or they're very clever. And that's the idea with Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and some of these other animal figures that we took on into our world of cartoons. In the Native American culture, The raven is the typical trickster. He's known for, actually, this is true, ravens are very attracted to shiny things, and they will pick up bits of aluminum foil or even diamond rings and carry them back to their nests just because they like the shiny things. And they can play tricks on you and steal things from you, but they're always teaching you a lesson. In the Native American way of looking at things, they're always trying to give you some lesson. So the trickster is there to shake things up a little bit. The humor and the poking fun at people is there to make you more honest and to show you that you're not the all-powerful and all-important person you might want to be. In fact, they're there to cut you down to size and make you laugh at yourself. And it's a very healthy part of storytelling to have this comic relief that they talk about in Shakespeare. Shakespeare, no matter how heavy the play was, he would always have a little bit where there was a clown who was a drunken doorkeeper or something like that. And it would just give a little laugh for the audience so they could bear with the heavy emotions of the rest of the story. And today we have lots of clowns like this. This is Borat, who goes around making fun of everybody and everything. He's got to come up with the new personality now because everybody kind of knows his trick. I actually wrote an animated feature in Germany called Till Eulenspiegel, or in English, Jester Till, which is about a real character, Till Eulenspiegel, who was sort of a class clown of Europe in the 1300s. And he went around from town to town, just like Borat, making fun of every institution, the church, the schools, the nobility, the bourgeois business people and craftspeople and so forth. He made fun of everybody and eventually was hung for his troubles. But even there, he had the last laugh on everybody and he turned it into a joke. So you couldn't get the best of a guy like that. And it was great fun to work on this sort of fairy tale, folktale character. So now my cursor is stuck, or my slides are not advancing. Sorry. We're doing so well.
Chris,
Yes.
Yes.
it's your computer. Your computer is trying to catch up with all the things that are going on in it.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
When it freezes like that, just take a question or two.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right, Mike. It will eventually catch up and probably jump several slides ahead. Anybody have any questions thus far on what we've been talking about?
I do.
What you got?
Does there seem to be age specific to hero versus villain? And I'll put that in the context. I just came off of this 16-hour marathon watching Earl Flynn
Oh boy.
on TCM. I
Right.
loved it. You mentioned it. But in his early years, he was always the hero. He was just bigger than life, Captain Blood, Robin Hood and Seahawk and all of that. And then it seemed like as he aged, as he got older, he became more nefarious or darker. I'm just wondering if that, as a general rule, maybe not in every aspect, but as a general rule, are heroes often young and vibrant, or can we see heroes as in more of an age or an elderly role?
Well,
What-
that's a great question. It's beautiful because you can do whatever works for you. And you're absolutely right to point out that tendency that certainly the innocent, idealistic heroes tend to be the younger ones. But what you saw happening with Flynn, you're absolutely right about that. There was a cynicism that crept in. I think that was also reflecting what happened after World War II. People came back from that war, and suddenly a silly movie about Robin Hood in tights didn't match with the reality of the war they had seen. So we moved to more black and white crime dramas. You got hard-boiled detectives and, you know, tough guys.
Is that where the film noir really developed?
Well, it really started earlier than that, out of the Depression.
Okay.
And even you can go back to the aftermath of World War I. That's, I think, really where most of that cynical edge came from. But here's the point. The beautiful thing is you can create wonderful stories about an older hero. And there's a whole genre of these where I guess the fundamental one is in the later versions of the King Arthur story. You know, King Arthur is that Errol Flynn young hero bouncing around and, you know, being very active and so forth. But in the later versions, the king is wounded, he's been betrayed, his wife has left him for another man, and everybo's sort of sitting around the castle depressed. And you know, they're all eating and drinking, but you know, the thrill is gone. And then along comes a young man who's got this bouncy, youthful, positive energy. This is Percival, and or Parsifal, they call him in Germany. And he looks around the court and he says, well, what's wrong with you knights? I mean, where's all the shiny armor? And why aren't you out saving damsels and killing dragons and rescuing people and righting wrongs? What's wrong with you? And he gets them up out of their chairs and off their fat asses and gets them out to do one last quest, which is to find the Holy Grail. So that form is a wonderful form. I see it a lot in student films. They kind of romanticize an older mentor, and they'll tell a story about somebody's uncle who used to be a painter, or once he was a great sculptor, and he's put it all aside to raise a family or whatever. But then the young person comes along and finds the paintings in the closet and says, Grandpa or Uncle Ted, why didn't you follow through on this? And he said, oh, that's an old thing. That's the old me. I don't do that anymore. And the young person said, no, you ought to try. And he thinks it over, and then he starts painting again and gets a whole new life. And that's a wonderful, heartwarming story. So you have some opportunities to do some different variations on this. And like I say, whatever works for you is okay in this story universe. So I'm still on a stuck screen, and I kind of have to guess what the next slides are.
Could I make one suggestion?
Yes, please.
Sorry, this is Linda. It's not really my meeting, but sometimes if everybody goes on mute and stops their video, and we'll see if that gives you a little bit more bandwidth to move your mouse and just see if it works. If anybody who's not speaking or presenting can mute and
yeah, that would be good. That's a good fix if it works.
Certainly worth a try.
It's worth trying. Yeah.
Chris, I do have a question, if we can take some time for another question.
Sure.
You mentioned at the beginning how there was a distinction noticed between remarks that might be made in private and those that might be made publicly. And I'd just like to hear you elaborate a little bit more on that. And just, in other words, is if you change the nature of your comment, whether it's public or private, is that simply hypocrisy, or is there wisdom to that sometimes?
Yes, that's very interesting. Yeah, there are two levels going on within almost every person and every character. And I think the Greek philosophy, as I understand it, was that they should match, that what you see is what you get. So you should be transparent, in other words, and you shouldn't be hiding a secret identity. If you're a scoundrel, be a scoundrel and don't kid around. If you're a goody two-shoes, be that and don't pretend to be cynical. But in fact, there are these subtexts and different subterranean channels that people have, and those make very interesting stories. First of all, you get the two levels of the superheroes, or the Caped Crusaders, who have a secret identity. And those don't match, because Zorro, as an ordinary Don Diego, is a kind of foolish, ineffectual person. He pretends to be very effeminate and kind of a snob, and not a man of action, but that's to conceal this other side. So sometimes that duality can serve somebody. And there are many interesting variations on this. One is where there's something lurking like that inside you and you don't know it. And other people maybe can see it, but you can't. There's certainly forms of clinical mental illness that are like that, where you've been under the influence of some delusion, and some inner personality arises, and people around you are going, "What is this? That's not the guy I know. What's going on here?" And you may be defended against that and say, "No, nothing's changed. That's exactly the same as I was yesterday." But in fact, there's some deep psychic disturbance going on. So this is a rich area for exploration.
Chris, I'm gonna try something. Okay, I'm gonna kick you off co-host and put you back on.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I like that thought. Okay, I see some movement in the slides.
Did that help?
Yeah, I don't think we got any further along. I just, for time, I'm gonna wing it and just touch upon the last two of these archetypes, if I'm remembering all of them. The next one I wanted to touch on is the threshold guardian. And this is just an observation that in so many stories, there seems to be a figure that appears when you are ready to cross over from one world to another. This is a big deal in mythology and in my sort of theory of storytelling, that there are different worlds, different rooms. Let's say it's as if you were going through a big cave, and the cave has different chambers. And between the chambers, there are some narrow passageways you have to crawl through, and then you come out into a big chamber in the second act, and then again in the third act. At these narrow places, as you go between the worlds, there will often be characters who just pop up to question you, or put a tax on you, or attack you, or threaten you, or try to block your way. And those I'm calling threshold guardians, because that's their job, is to guard that border. And it happens that at some point I realized my job in the studio system for 20 years was that of the threshold guardian. I was a professional threshold guardian for the studios, meaning that I was standing at the gate, and my job was to take in what people brought, the scripts or the comic books or the novels or whatever it was, that was brought in by the producers and the writers and whoever wanted to put something before the studio. I was the first one there to look at it and write my report. And 99% of the time, I put up my hand like a stop sign and said no. I always try to do it nicely. No, thank you. Or just not right for us right now. Not exactly a match for what we're looking for. Things like that. But basically saying no to most of the traffic. But every once in a while, the job shifts. And instead of blocking, you change your hand around and you go, yes, come in. This is great. This is exactly what we wanted. I'm going to tell everybody about this. And, I became a kind of a mentor. So I shifted my mask from being this threatening threshold guardian to actually being kind of a kindly mentor who was helping them along. Because I would make the introduction then and I would say, you got to read this script. This is a fantastic story and would make a great movie. So a few times I was able to serve that function in somebody's career and actually, help make a career. So, these characters do show up. And again, it could be any character who finds himself or herself in that position and then suddenly realizes, oh, I guess I'm the threshold guardian today, and I have to wear that mask and I have to do that job. So the job is really to test the hero and make sure they've got what it takes and that they really mean it. I'm watching one of these long shows now called Winning Time about the Lakers. Anybody watching that show? That's, I think, quite entertaining. Maybe not accurate, but it's very entertaining. And there's a scene in it where Magic Johnson is sort of struggling in his career. And one of the coaching staff comes to him and says, I think the problem is you don't really want it. You want to be liked more than you want to win. So you've got to decide, what do you want? Do you want to be liked or do you want to win? And he comes around in that scene and realizes this is a threshold guardian who's telling me you can't go any further unless you make this adjustment. So he pays the price and he says, I want to win, and says it very emphatically. So that's the job of the threshold guardian. I wish I had some images to show you. The final one is the ally. The heroes need somebody as a sidekick or a buddy or a friend or somebody to talk to, somebody to ride alongside them. And some heroes get away without it, but it's a feature that we like. We like it when heroes team up with somebody, and it gives a lot of opportunities for humor and also sort of emotional insight, because those characters who maybe are if the hero is female and it's a romance story, maybe it's the heroine's friend who advises her, you ought to go after this guy, he's interested in you, you ought to do this particular trick to try and get his attention. They give advice and try to guide the hero. And sometimes they get sacrificed. They have a function sometimes of being the hero's friend who is kidnapped or killed by the bad guys. And that motivates the hero then. I have to rescue my ally, my friend. I have to avenge their death if the villains have attacked them. So the ally is an important function. And we like these stories where they're teamed up and you have sort of a balance in a way emotionally between, like, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. They are two wildly different characters with different personalities and approaches, but together they make a very interesting team. And the chance is there for a comedy also, because in some versions of Dr. Watson, he's sort of a bumbling idiot and is amused but also amazed by Sherlock Holmes, and Sherlock Holmes thinks he's pretty silly and funny. but they balance each other out. So the ally sometimes brings something that's needed to the hero. So you have many sidekicks like that in Westerns. We talked about Errol Flynn. He would sometimes, when he went down the Western road and he made some Westerns, there would be some character actor who played an older fella who was funny and but also wise and pointed out some things the hero couldn't see. There was one guy named Fuzzy Knight. They all had funny names like Gabby Hayes and Fuzzy Knight, and were lovable old coots, you know, but they had a serious job to do. Walter Brennan did it in a lot of John Wayne's movies. And he wasn't that much older than John Wayne, but he played a lot older and was a comic sidekick, but also kind of a mentor and a source of wisdom. John Wayne didn't pay much attention to his wisdom, but he was usually right. And the hero eventually might have to admit that. So that's my cast of characters. Those are the main archetypes. And we've gone a little over our allotted time, but if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer and discuss whatever's on your minds about archetypes, characters, or whatever you're curious about.
I'd like to mention something is in my stories, I write about superhero type characters.
I see that. Yeah.
One in particular behind me who's kind of the Superman with a, shall we say, anger issues. I didn't want her to be Superman that way. I wanted her to really get mad. One thing is I've never liked the expression power corrupts because it kind of excuses people if they get power and misuse it. I kind of think of it more like from the Swamp Thing movie, it's power makes you more of what you already are. So I'm thinking perhaps that applies to the heroes, to the villains. They get more powerful, they become more themselves, they can become more heroic or make bigger mistakes.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting thought. What I what popped into my head there was thinking about Shakespeare, because he'll play games with this a little bit. The most famous example, I guess, is the character who ends up being Henry V, Prince Hal. And he starts out as a playboy and somebody that nobody takes seriously. And if anybody thought he could be the king, they were in for trouble. And he was not a likely candidate to be king. Everybody was quite worried about him taking over. And he had his friends around him. He had his ally, Falstaff, who had some contrasting character things and was an interesting character in his own right, a big braggart, a blusterer, but actually a coward. And he would take credit for things he hadn't done on the battlefield, but actually was a coward. So Shakespeare was playing around with this idea in many of his plays that rising to power, becoming king, does something to you. And that either you expand to fill the role, and that's what happened with Prince Hal. He found it in himself to change and to be a good king, tough, but properly tough king, and others didn't. Other people in the Shakespeare canon found either weak or evil versions of themselves. But I think you're onto something very interesting there. It's certainly something you could take a look at in politics, that somebody winning an election or winning a post, I think you're right. It does seem to bring out stuff or magnify stuff that was already there. So, and anyway, interesting point.
Can you talk about the anti-hero?
Yes, that's a kind of a shifty term. You sort of have to define it every time you talk about it. For some people, it means almost the villain. I think the proper way to use it is that it's a character, the way I see it, it's a character who is heroic in their own mind, maybe, but from the point of view of society, they're either a villain or an outlaw. So that's where the anti comes from in. They're
Both.
anti-society.
They can be both, really.
Yes.
Because I
Um,
think of Breaking Bad in a way.
Mhm. Yeah.
What was his motivation for becoming bad?
Yeah, he had a good thing in mind in the first place, necessity and his family, and also had psychological reasons for making the moves he did to sort of correct things in his life that were out of balance. But
What
yeah.
is the name of your book on archetypes?
Well, it's actually
Archetypes?
it's included in the book, The Writer's Journey.
Okay.
Yeah, I have two major sections in the book, and I sort of introduce the archetypes first, so you kind of know who the characters are, and then I go into the 12 stages. I do it the other way around. When I lecture, I usually give the structure first, and then if time permits, I'll go into the characters like we're doing tonight. Anybody else? These are good.
Well, Chris, let me say you are a delight to listen to. I could listen to you for a whole lot longer than we have tonight, but I appreciate everything that you've said. And if I have anything to say about it, we're going to try to get you back sooner than later.
Well, that'd be great for me. I'm just having a laugh here because the image that got stuck up on the screen was the trickster. And the trickster's obviously at work on the technological side of things today, and trying to make me laugh at myself or bring me down a peg.
You're poltergeist.
So well done, Mr. Trickster. You did your job. You did your archetypal function very well. So
Yes,
thank you all very much, and
Thank
I
you
hope you
so
find
much.
something useful and you can put into your work, and look forward to hearing your stories because the world needs them. All right.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank
It
you.
was excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care.
you so much.
So long. Thank you.
everybody.
Very nice.